Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you at whatever part of the day that you are watching this tutorial. We are going to consider this a part two of my close reading of Jack London's To Build a Fire. Oh, my Lanta, my dog is so needy. Okay. Say hi, Chewy. Chewy loves to say hi to my students. He's our mascot. All right. All right, I put him down so that I can work my tools here. All right, so we are just looking at, if you recall from part one, I was just doing what I consider a close reading and kind of speaking aloud what I think about as I read through the story. I'm not going to read through the entire story. I'm just going to stop at certain parts and kind of show you things. But I did want to mention that last time I left you, we were on page... in here it's page 69 on this particular PDF. It's actually the 6th page of the PDF. So we left off after that first paragraph to permit the ice to remain would mean sore feet. It did not know this, speaking of the dog. It merely obeyed the commands that arose from the deepest part of its being. So as I read through here, again, I'm not going to read the entire story out loud. I did give you the audio for that under content. You will find the audio recording, and the guy that I chose actually does a really good job of reading the story. But the last we talked, I was mentioning this idea of instinct. That is a really big deal in this story, right? The whole idea and reason we're reading this story for this unit is the man versus nature motif. And so instinct plays a big part in this story. It also plays a big part in the whole man versus nature idea, because man in this story tends not to act on instinct, but tends to think of himself as better than nature, or outsmarting nature, or kind of mocking nature, scoffing at nature. I don't know how else you want to describe that. There's probably several adverbs we could use, adjectives we could use. Anyway, we'll get to that. All right, so I'm going to go back to the story here, and I'm going to read for a little bit and then pause before I move to a different slide. Actually, I don't know if I need my readers for this. Okay, let's see. But the man knew these things. Okay, having learned them from experience. Okay, that to me is a major red flag. That's one of those ding, 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 because we heard from the narrator earlier, this omniscient narrator, that the man doesn't have experience. He's never been in this type of cold before. Let me see if I can just prove that. This is just how I am. I have to prove to myself and prove to others that this is true. Oh, yeah, here on page 65. And this is another reason to point out to you why I capture text evidence, because I'm going to need it later. Well, here's a prime example of where I'm going to need it later. And these are things that we do even, between readers, like in book clubs and things. We'll say, wait, doesn't he say earlier that he was new, that he wasn't familiar with it, that he doesn't have experience with it? Where does it say that? And we'll have Post-it notes, and we'll have put things in the margins of our books and things. And this is a prime example of that. I wanted to explain to you how, no, he doesn't have experience with it. And here's the proof. Here's the text evidence, the proof for my claim. But all this had no effect on the man. And that is, if I have an arrow here, but all this, the distant trail, no sun in the sky, the great cold, and the strangeness of it all had no effect on the man. It was not because he was long familiar with it. He was a newcomer in the land, and this was his first winter. Ding, ding, ding. All right. So now if I go back to my reading, I'm like, that should raise a red flag for me. But the man knew these things, having learned them from experience. He removed the mitten. Okay, let me back up a little bit. He might have learned some things from experience, but he's never had this kind of experience. He's never had to deal with this level of cold before, minus 70 below. He removed the mitten from his right hand and helped the dog tear out the pieces of ice. Well, every time this man takes off his mitten, I cringe because I have been out in 20 below and tried to take off a mitten, and it has been devastating. So for this guy at 70 below, 4 times what I'm talking about at 20 below, every time he takes off his mitten, I just, why? He did not bare his fingers more than a minute. Well, more than a minute is too much. Anyway, and was surprised to find that they were numb. Yeah, they are. It certainly was cold. This is going to come up later. I'm going to point this out. How often this particular phrase comes up. The word cold comes up a lot, but this phrase, it certainly was cold. I don't know. It's almost like an understatement to me. It just is an alarm bell. He pulled on the mitten quickly and beat the hand across his breast. He ends up doing this thing a lot where he beats his hands and his arms and things, as we know. At 12 o'clock, the day was at its brightest. So that's the warmest it's going to be. That's the brightest it's going to be, in 24 hours, right? That's the height of the sun on our planet. It's 12 o'clock. Yet the sun did not appear in the sky. At 12:30 on the minute, he arrived at the divide of the creek. He was pleased at his rate of speed. If he continued, he would certainly be with the boys by 6 o'clock that evening. I don't know. Seems like a pipe dream at this point that he's going to be at this camp that he's so excited about. He unbuttoned his jacket and shirt and pulled forth his lunch. Oh, here he's finally going to have his lunch. The action took no more than a quarter of a minute. Quarter of a minute being how many seconds? 25 seconds? Wait, no. 20 seconds? Yet in that brief moment, the numbness touched his bare fingers. He did not put the mitten on, but instead struck the fingers against his leg. Here he goes again. Then he sat down on a snow-covered log to eat. The pain that followed the striking of his fingers against his leg ceased so quickly that he was frightened. He had not had time to take a bite of his lunch. He struck the fingers repeatedly and returned them to the mitten. Now, I get why he's doing this. He's trying to introduce blood flow. I don't know, but I just get irritated by him constantly doing this beating of his hands and fingers. It seems like he could find a better way. But then he bared the other hand for the purpose of eating. He tried to take a mouthful, but the ice around his mouth prevented him. I mean, at this point, is this guy not concerned about the dangers that he's involved in? I don't know. Then he knew what was wrong. He had forgotten to build a fire and warm himself. Okay. He laughed at his own foolishness. As he laughed, he noted the numbness in his bare fingers. Also, he noted that the feeling which had first come to his toes when he sat down was already passing away. He wondered whether the toes were warm or whether they were numb. I don't know if you've ever been this cold. I have. I've been like ice fishing and skiing and even just like snowshoeing or hiking where you don't know if you can't feel your toes because they're warm and toasty in your boots or if they've gotten numb. I've definitely been in that. I'm not sure. I'm just kind of asking you as a crowd here. Hypothetically, like, have you ever been in that situation where you don't know if your fingers or your toes are warm or numb? I definitely have been in that situation. Actually, ice skating too as a kid, that happened to me several times. He pulled the mitten on hurriedly and stood up. He was somewhat frightened. Okay. I don't know why he's not very frightened. Again, it's this idea the author wants us to understand about how man in general, and this particular man, is not taking nature serious enough. This man versus nature thing. You can't fool Mother Nature. Mother Nature doesn't care about you. Nature doesn't care about you. So scoffing at it seems ridiculous. He stamped forcefully until the feeling returned to his feet. It certainly was cold, was his thought. Here's that phrase again. It certainly was cold. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken. My dog is whining. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in this country. We're going to come back to this idea of the man from Sulphur Creek too, because that gets repeated several times. And we know when things get repeated, we know this from experience. If you didn't know it from experience, you know it now because Miss Carlson keeps telling you, keeps repeating. If it's something is repeated, it's supposed to be something that gets our attention. It's an important thing. That man from Sulphur Creek had spoken the truth when telling how cold it sometimes got in this country, and he had laughed at him at the time! Exclamation point. There we go again with don't fool with Mother Nature, right? He didn't take that man serious enough when he said how cold it gets. That showed one must not be too sure of things. Oh, y'all, I need to write that down. I need to type that because that is some amazing text evidence for this man versus nature motif. That showed one must not be too sure of things. I don't know why that is so hard for me to think about. All right, so I'm going to just kind of keep a bank of text evidence and just, modeling for you, showing you that you should be doing this as well. I'm going to also include and he had, so that gives me some context, laughed at, and I'm actually going to put the old man at, because if I just say him, we might not remember. The old man from Sulphur. This is how you put them in these square brackets, and that's saying that didn't get quoted exactly from the story, but that I am substituting that part for the pronoun him. And he had laughed at the old man from Sulphur Creek at the time! Exclamation point. That showed one must not be too sure of things. No period there. I know it seems weird not to put a period there. Quotation mark, parentheses. This is how to do an MLA citation. The author's last name and the page number, and that was page 70. Then the period. The period goes outside of the parentheses. It's hard to get used to, but once you do, you don't even think about it anymore. And then, I don't know, maybe I want to toss in here why I've collected this particular, I don't know. Sometimes I just keep a running bank of text evidence and go back later and see if I want any of it. But here I'm just going to make a note to myself. This is evidence of never underestimating nature and its force or fury. I don't know. We can always come back and tighten that up if we want to revise that. All right. There was no mistake about it. It was cold. That comes up a lot too. It certainly was cold. It was cold. I don't even know how many times. I am going to tell you in a little while, though, how many times cold comes up in this story. But even just these particular phrases, it certainly was cold. It was cold. That comes up a lot. As if we, haven't figured that out by now. He walked a few steps, stamping his feet and waving his arms until reassured by the returning warmth. Then he took some matches and proceeded to make a fire. In the bushes, the high water had left a supply of sticks. Well, that's fortunate. From here, he got wood for his fire. Working carefully from a small beginning, he soon had a roaring fire, and we're like happy for him. We're like, oh, thank goodness. And I don't know if you're like me, but I'm happy for the dog too. Bending over the fire, he first melted the ice from his face. With the protection of the fire's warmth, he ate his lunch. For the moment, the cold had been forced away. The dog took comfort in the fire, lying at full length, close enough for warmth and far enough away to escape being burned. When the man had finished eating, he filled his pipe with tobacco and had a comfortable time with a smoke. Then he pulled on his mittens, settled his cap firmly about his ears, and started along the creek trail toward the left. And here we're starting to feel hopeful, right? We're starting to feel good about things. Although we're a little sad. Oh, they're going to leave this nice warm fire and get back on the cold trail. But all right. The dog was sorry to leave, and so are we, and looked toward the fire. This man did not know cold. Possibly none of his ancestors had known cold, real cold. But the dog knew, and all of its family knew. The dog and his ancestors knew. And it knew that it was not good to walk outside in such fearful cold. It was the time to lie in a hole in the snow and to wait for this awful cold to stop. There was no real bond between the dog and the man. That kind of makes me sad too. The one was a slave of the other. The dog made no effort to indicate its fears to the man. It was not concerned with the well-being of the man. That is very important as well. In fact, I think I am going to take note of that. It was not concerned with the well-being of the man. Oh, what page is this? 70 still. Here is where I want you to take note, because I'm telling you right now that the dog is a symbol. A symbol of what? The dog is a major symbol of nature, or symbol for nature, or however you want to put it. The dog is nature. Fire is nature. Cold is nature. Okay. So, the dog, you could replace that with nature, and it means the same thing. Nature was not concerned with the well-being of the man. The dog was not concerned with the well-being of the man. Cold was not concerned with the well-being of the man. Okay. So hopefully that makes sense to you, and why I keep harping on how I want you to take note of how many times things are mentioned, and taking note of this man versus nature motif showing up in the story. It was not concerned with the well-being of the man. It was for its own sake that it looked toward the fire. But the man whistled and spoke to it with the sound of the whip in his voice. Ooh. So the dog started walking close to the man's heels and followed him along the trail. I gave you a second PDF that actually followed the audio more closely. This particular PDF is sort of an abridged version, a little bit easier to read. But this idea of the whip actually is played out more in the other PDF if you want to take a look at that. The man put more tobacco in his mouth and started a new growth of yellow ice on his face. Again, his moist breath quickly powdered the hair on his face with white. He looked around him. There did not seem to be so many pools of water under the snow on the left side of Henderson Creek, and for half an hour the man saw no signs of any, so didn't see any pools under the snow. And then it happened. Dun, dun, dun. At a place where there were no signs, the man broke through. It was not deep. This is where, I don't know if you remember me saying in the overview how you get this like pit kind of like, I can't remember how I put it in the overview, but basically this is that spot in the story where I just go, oh no. He was wet to his knees before he got out of the water to the firm snow. He was angry and cursed his luck aloud. Okay, first of all, buddy, luck has nothing to do with this. You went into this unprepared. He had hoped to get into camp with the boys at 6 o'clock. This is the first time, by the way, he's saying he had hoped to get. Until now, it was a thing. It was a sure thing. He was going to get into camp by 6 o'clock. He had everything planned out. Everything was perfect. It's the first time he says he had hoped, that past perfect tense, that, oh boy, he had hoped to get to camp by 6 o'clock. And now we know, yeah. And this would delay him an hour. Well, we're kind of wondering if it's not going to be more than that. Now he would have to build a fire and dry his moccasins and socks. This was most important at that low temperature. He knew that much. Duh, okay. So he turned aside to the bank, which he climbed. On top, under several small pine trees, he found some firewood, which had been carried there by the high water of last year. There were some sticks, but also larger branches and some dry grasses. He threw several large branches on top of the snow. This served for a foundation and prevented the young flame from dying in the wet snow. He made a flame by touching a match to a small piece of tree bark that he took from his pocket. This burned even better than paper. Placing it on the foundation, he fed the young flame with pieces of dry grass and with the smallest dry sticks. He worked slowly and carefully, realizing his danger. Gradually, as the flame grew stronger, he increased the size of the sticks which he fed it. When it is 75 below zero, a man must not fail in his first attempt to build a fire. Good warning sign, especially if his feet are wet. So I'm going to skip some of this for now because I said I wasn't going to read the whole thing. But I did want to point out how on page 71, here it comes again, the old man and Sulphur Creek. So the fact that this keeps on repeating means that there is some importance about this old man on Sulphur Creek. And I wonder if it's sort of playing the part of, I don't want to say the man's conscience because it's not a guilt thing, but it's playing the, I feel like the old man on Sulphur Creek is also the symbol of nature, if I'm thinking, because this voice resonating in this guy's head is telling him the facts, right? Everything that he mentions that this old guy said is coming true, if that makes sense. Now he was grateful for the advice. Well, maybe you should have heeded the advice. I'm glad you're grateful for it, but maybe you should have heeded the advice of the old man on Sulphur Creek, right? Is that so is this sentence a regret, maybe? Already all feeling had gone from his feet. And if I scroll through the next parts of the story, this is where, if you remember, it goes on and on and on, almost to ad nauseum of, this suspenseful buildup that we kind of know what's going to happen. Like, especially when, here's that old man at Sulphur Creek again. Especially when, where is it? Where the fire, here it is. Okay, there was the fire promising life with every dancing flame. So we start to get hopeful again. He unties his moccasins. It happened. This is where we went bonk, gong, gong again. It happened. If you read the story, you know what it was. It was his own fault, or instead his mistake. He should not have built the fire under the pine tree. Oh, no. He should have built it in an open space, but it had been easier to pull the sticks from the bushes. It had been easier. And I've been in that situation too. I just want the easiest path. It had been easier to put the sticks or pull the sticks from the bushes and drop them directly on the fire. But guess what? Those pine boughs had been loaded with snow and the whole thing came crashing down onto the fire. And then, yeah, we know things aren't so good. So again, I'm going to kind of keep pulling forward and get to toward the end of the story. He goes through battle after battle after battle trying to get warm again. I get this fire built again, and it comes to this point where like he can't move his fingers, he can't grip anything. The dog is just out of his reach. This is such a dark part of this story where he thinks about a story where a guy had cut open a cow, I think, and like got inside of it to warm himself up. And he thought about doing that with the dog. And I was like, oh, I mean, I guess for survival, right? So he tries to call the dog to him, but the dog, again, this instinct, ding, 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 sensed something was wrong and it sensed danger. And he didn't know what the danger was, but it's enough in the dog to know, do not go to that guy. So instinct, what? It saved the dog. Too bad the guy didn't have the same instinct about danger, right? So the dog won't come to him. And this is toward the last part of the story now. It was all he could do, hold its body and circle. Oh, wait, no, he did get a hold of the dog. Wait, now I'm confusing myself. All this happened quickly before the animal could escape. So he did get a hold of the dog, but he can't grasp. He has no feeling left in his hands. He encircled its body with his arms. I forgot this part. He sat down in the snow and in this fashion held the dog while it barked and struggled. But it was all he could do, hold its body encircled in his arms and sit there. He realized he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his frozen hands, he could neither draw nor hold his knife. Nor could he grasp the dog around the throat. He freed it and it dashed away wildly, still barking. It stopped 40 feet away and observed him curiously. And then here comes a certain fear of death came upon him. It was no longer a mere problem of freezing his fingers or toes or of losing his hands and feet. Now it was a problem of life and death with circumstances against him. Nature is against him. The fear made him lose control of himself, and he turned and ran along. This was shocking to me that he could still run, being how numb everything was. He did not shake anymore. Maybe if he could continue to run, and it's like he still has hope, but we kind of know hope is running out here. His idea of running until he arrived at the camp and the boys presented one problem. He lacked the endurance. Several times he caught himself as he was falling. Finally, he dropped to the ground, unable to stop his fall. When he tried to rise, he failed. He must sit and rest, he decided. Next time, he would merely walk and keep going. Here, if you know anything about hypothermia, as he sat and regained his breath, he noted he was feeling warm and comfortable. He was not shaking. It even seemed a warm glow had come to his body. If you know anything about this, or if you want to even do a little research about hypothermia, that is something that happens right before the critical point. So something with hypothermia where the body starts to feel warm again, and that's actually a really bad sign. It was his last moment of fear. When he had recovered his breath and his control, he sat and thought about meeting death with dignity. However, the idea did not come to him in exactly this manner. His idea was that he had been acting like a fool. He had been running around like a chicken with its head cut off. He was certain to freeze in his present circumstances, and he should accept it calmly. With this newfound peace of mind came the first sleepiness, another sign of hypothermia. A good idea, he thought, to sleep his way to death. Freezing was not as bad as people thought. There were many worse ways to die. He pictured the boys finding his body the next day. Suddenly he saw himself with them, coming along the trail and looking for himself, and still with them, so he might be having some delusions here. He did not belong with himself anymore. Even then, he was outside himself, standing with the boys and looking at himself in the snow. It certainly was cold. There's that phrase again. Was his thought. When he returned to the United States, he could tell the folks what real cold was. So he's having these delusional thoughts, which are also part of hypothermia. I don't know if he actually said this. It says he murmured it. You were right, old fellow. You were right, he murmured to the old man of Sulphur Creek. Then the man dropped into what seemed to him the most comfortable and satisfying sleep he had ever known. The dog sat facing him and waiting. The brief day ended in a long evening. There were no signs of a fire to be made. Never in the dog's experience had it known a man to sit like that in the snow and make no fire. As the evening grew darker, its eager longing for the fire mastered it. Excuse me. With much lifting of its feet, it cried softly. Then it flattened its ears, expecting the man's curse. But the man remained silent. Later, the dog howled loudly, and still later, it moved close to the man and caught the smell of death. This made the animal back away. A little longer it delayed, howling under the stars that leaped and danced and shone brightly in the cold sky. Then it turned and ran along the trail toward the camp it knew, where there were other food providers and fire providers. Such an interesting statement. It knew the camp. Again, instinctually, it knows where to return to the camp, where there were the other food providers and fire providers. Not friend, not master, not John, not Larry, not Mo. Food providers, fire providers. That is what the dog considers human beings to be, right? And it's just another reminder the dog is nature. Nature doesn't care about you, doesn't care about your names. There are no names. Even that other guy is referred to the old man from Sulphur Creek. He doesn't have a name. Oh, wait, there was one guy that did have a name. It was the guy that he thought about. Oh, that's interesting. Y'all, I've never thought about this before. The guy who wore a nose mask. And again, another important thing that I took notes about earlier on. I know I made a note of this. Yes. Page 67, he was sorry that he had not worn the sort of nose guard Bud wore when it was cold. Now, is Bud a name? I mean, it's the closest to a name we have. Bud is usually a nickname, like, hey, Bud, hey, bro. It's usually not even a shortening of something. It's usually like, well, short for buddy, but it's not really a name. But it's the closest we have to a name. And for some reason, I've never thought about that before. All right, so not a happy ending, that is for sure. And I knew that going in. I think I warned you, not a happy ending happening here. So what did we learn today? We learned that you are going to be able to record the what, where, and how the man versus nature motif shows up in Jack London's To Build a Fire. Hopefully you are realizing that the what would be the dog, the cold, the Yukon Trail, Alaska, Canada, up where it gets to 75 below is the where. The what is the man, walking off trail. And the man versus nature motif, obviously all the way throughout the story, showing up as the old man from Sulphur Creek, showing as the cold, showing as the dog, right? I also want to make sure that you're able to answer the who, what, where, why, when, how journalistic questions for the story. So we're going to look at that in just a minute. And then I want to be sure that you can apply and find text evidence for special meanings of the old man from Sulphur Creek, the dog, fire, cold. I've been showing you how I take notes with that kind of thing. All right, so what do I need to know about the Yukon Territory? It was part of your KWL from my first close reading slides. So under what I know, the Yukon Territory is known for its harsh cold climate and rugged terrain. Since the setting of To Build a Fire is in the Yukon Territory, I know it will play a crucial role in the story's plot and themes. Well, it certainly does. How does the setting of the Yukon impact the characters and their actions in the story? What specific details about the setting are important to understanding To Build a Fire? So one way I like to address a question like this is to ask you how you think, and I'm not going to make you do this as an assignment. Sometimes I would actually make an assignment that said, write this story in a different setting. But for now, let's just peruse that, think through that, brainstorm that. What if this weren't in the Yukon? What if this weren't a 75 below setting? What if it were, for instance, the Sahara Desert? Would that impact the characters? Would that impact their actions? What would be similar about the Sahara Desert? What would be different about the Sahara Desert? I mean, obviously, instead of snow, we would have sand. Instead of extreme cold, we would have extreme heat, right? So different things. But I think the story could be very similar in a lot of ways. Because of the whole man versus nature. If you underestimate what it would be like to be exposed to the elements in the Sahara Desert, a lot of the same things, troubling things could happen, right? Do not underestimate Mother Nature is the whole idea of naturalist writers and their meanings. So does the setting of the Yukon impact the characters and their actions? Of course it does, right? Being faced with such extreme conditions, of course it impacts the characters. Of course it impacts their actions and reactions. What specific details about the setting are important for understanding To Build a Fire? What important details? Well, I would say for sure the extreme cold, minus 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I would say snow, water, let's say the dangers of getting wet in such extreme cold, the dangers of underestimating how this level of cold affects humans. And then I would say how knowledge is no match for instinct. So I know I kind of rattled that off quickly, but these are some things about what you learned in this story as it pertains to the setting, and how setting is important. Setting almost acts as a character. Actually, I'm going to add that here. Setting acts as one of the characters in this story. That's important. If it weren't for the setting, I don't think the story would be the same. I think we can say that. Setting, very important character in this. All right, what was my other learning target for us? Where did I put my learning targets? Here we go. Okay, so students could record the what, where, and how man versus nature motif shows up. I think you can do that now. Students can answer the who, what, where. Let's look at that. That was something I asked you to do early on. Who, what, when, where, why, how. I want you to be able to show me that you would be able to fill something like this out, because it's going to be important in our unit final. So I filled this out a little bit earlier. I'm not saying this is a be-all, end-all, but I just kind of went through and filled it in the best I was thinking at the time. So let's see how well I did. The who, the man, right? Who is the main character? Is the man. You could also say the omniscient narrator is the who, so maybe add that to it as well. In fact, I'm going to put that third person omniscient narrator. I may even ask you that on a quiz or on the unit final. Tells the story of a man. And I also put in there again, just to remind us that names are kept out of the story. And that is a particular literary tool. Why can't I say that? It's meant to show us that there is this idea that nature doesn't care enough about us. I said not caring about us one iota. Nature does not care about us. Nature does not give us a name. And so that's pointed out to us in this story by making sure the characters have no names. The man is traveling off the main trail. We never really know why, do we? Is it to save time? Maybe that was implied. But he gets off the main trail, and right away, that's my big red flag. Why? Why are you getting off the main trail? You aren't even familiar with this area. And he wants to get to some kind of camp. We're assuming it's something to do with the Klondike Gold Rush, getting back to the miners' camp, I think. But he also mentions lumber. So I think he is kind of hoping to maybe do some lumber in the springtime or something. He mentions logs or rolling logs or something. When we know it's during the Klondike Gold Rush, which lasted from 1896 to 1899. Where? In the Yukon Territory, or Yukon Territories, it's sometimes called, at minus 70 degrees below. I think it might have even said 75 in a couple places Fahrenheit. Why he's headed to camp with other miners, but why he goes off trail is another question we should try and answer. And then how? Well, how he takes a sandwich and his dog. I guess I could add he does have some matches. I guess that's important. But he's not exactly equipped for the dangers involved in traveling in such extreme temperatures. And some other things I wanted to point out. I want you to be asking yourself and trying to answer yourself about what special meaning these things have. The old man at Sulphur Creek. Look up how many times that appears. See if you can find in the story. I might even ask you that on a quiz. How many times does this mention of the old man at Sulphur Creek show up in the story? And what does he represent? I think I mentioned earlier he might act as, and I said conscience wouldn't be the right word because that's more like, you know, connotated with guilt. I don't think he feels guilt, but I do think that guy keeps popping in as kind of the voice of reason. Let's say that. The old man at Sulphur Creek might be the voice of reason in the man's head, in the man's what? I don't want to say conscience again because it just doesn't seem right. In the man's mind, I'll just say. So it might be acting as the voice of reason. The dog, the word dog appears 37 times in this story. I counted. I already told you the dog represents nature, instinct. It's not about knowledge. It's not about accumulated knowledge. It's not about even experience. I mean, the man doesn't have any experience either. But really for the dog, it's not so much experience as it is instinct, nature. And the dog would never think to go against nature. Like that would never occur to the dog to mind over matter. No, it's all about instinct. Fire. The word fire appears 43 times in the story. Obviously, it's very important. What do you think it's a symbol of? I kind of think I'm going to not answer that for you. I think I want you to find out. Do some research. What does fire represent in general? If you Google, what is fire a symbol of? What does fire, what literary meaning does fire have in general and in this particular story? You know, if you Google, what is fire a symbol of in To Build a Fire? I mean, the name even comes up in the title. And actually, I don't think that's included in my 43 times. So if I include it in the title, it might be 44. I can't remember if I included that. But look it up. What is a fire a symbol of? It's very important in this story, obviously. Why? Why is it so important? What happens when he builds a fire? And then cold, the word cold, or a form of the word cold, appears 38 times. Interesting how not as many times as fire. Do you find that interesting? So what is cold symbolic of? And even this line, it certainly was cold, showed up 4 that I counted, and I might have missed it. But even that particular phrase showed up 4 times. But the word cold or a form of cold shows up 38 times in the story. I do kind of wonder too if Sulphur Creek, I don't know where that is. I could probably look it up, but I think it's interesting that the word sulfur appears because if you know anything about sulfur, the element, I don't know, maybe there's some intrinsic meaning in that as well. All right, well, that is about it for today. I believe we got through all of the learning targets today, and you are going to be super, super knowledgeable about this story. It is a classic, and you will forever be grateful for having read it and understand it because you will likely see this story or the mention of this story and the author Jack London pop up many, many times throughout your life. So thank you for sticking with it. I hope you enjoyed it, even though it has a very sad outcome. Like I said, I hope you enjoyed it.